Imagine descending into the most unrelenting environment on Earth. You leave the sunlight behind, plunging into absolute suffocating darkness. You're now 11,000 meters below the ocean's surface, standing at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench. Down here, the physical forces are almost incomprehensible. The hydrostatic pressure reaches over 1,000 times the standard atmospheric pressure at sea level. To put that into perspective, it is the equivalent of having 50 jumbo jets stacked directly on top of your body. Under this kind of crushing force, human bones would instantly splinter, and standard biological cells would simply collapse. Yet, life thrives here. But to survive in freezing temperatures, perpetual night, and bone-crushing pressure, evolution had to completely rewrite its own rulebook. Down in the abyss, the biological adaptations are so extreme they border on the alien. We're talking about predators that hunt without eyes, giants that hover in the dark with tentacles trailing for meters, and translucent bodies perfectly engineered to defy destruction. The creatures of the Hadal Zone did not just adapt to the trench, they allowed the trench to mold them into something entirely new. Today, we will explore why nothing is normal in the Mariana Trench. We will dive deep into the evolutionary mechanics, the biochemistry, and the bizarre survival strategies of the most mysterious organisms on our planet. If you are ready to venture into the deep, feel free to like and subscribe. Also, leave a comment below letting us know where in the world and at what time you're watching this journey into the dark. Now take a deep breath, because we are going down. Before we can truly understand the bizarre creatures that call this place home, we must first understand the stage on which they perform. The Mariana Trench is not merely a deep canyon or a random depression on the ocean floor. It is a massive geological scar, a violent intersection of the Earth's tectonic plates. To comprehend its existence, we have to zoom out and look at the planetary scale. The Earth's crust is not a single solid shell. It is fractured into massive jigsaw puzzle pieces called tectonic plates, which are constantly shifting, colliding, and sliding past one another. The Mariana Trench is the direct result of a brutal geological process known as subduction. Here, the massive Pacific Plate, which is one of the oldest, coldest, and heaviest pieces of the oceanic crust, collides with a much smaller and lighter Mariana Plate. Because the Pacific Plate is older and vastly denser, it is forced downward, plunging relentlessly beneath the Mariana Plate and diving deep into the Earth's scorching mantle. This slow-motion collision happens at a rate of only a few centimeters per year, which is roughly the speed your fingernails grow. Yet, over millions of years, this unstoppable grinding force has carved out a crescent-shaped chasm in the western Pacific Ocean that stretches for over 2,500 kilometers. The deepest point of this chasm, known as the Challenger Deep, plunges nearly 11,000 meters down into the abyss. If you were to drop Mount Everest into this trench, its peak would still be submerged under more than 2 kilometers of pitch-black water. It is a place where the Earth is literally recycling its own outer skin, dragging the seafloor down into the fiery depths of the planet's interior. But for the creatures living in the trench, the geological drama of shifting tectonic plates is only the beginning of their problems. The true enemy down here is not the grinding rock beneath them, but the unimaginable, suffocating weight of the water above them. This brings us to the physics of hydrostatic pressure. When we stand on land at sea level, we experience 1 atmosphere of pressure. This is the accumulated weight of all the air in the Earth's atmosphere pressing down on our bodies. We do not feel it because our bodies are perfectly adapted to push back outward with equal force. However, water is vastly denser and heavier than air. A single cubic meter of seawater weighs slightly more than 1 metric ton. Now, imagine stacking 11,000 of those massive cubic meters directly on top of each other. For every 10 meters you descend into the ocean, the hydrostatic pressure increases by the equivalent of 1 entire atmosphere. By the time you reach the abyssal plains and drop further into the Hadal Zone of the Mariana Trench, the pressure reaches a staggering 1,000 atmospheres. To put this into a physical perspective, that is roughly 1,000 kilograms of force pressing down on every single square centimetre of an object. It is a crushing, omnipresent force that attacks from all sides simultaneously. In standard physics, water is generally considered an incompressible fluid, but at these extreme depths, the hydrostatic pressure is so immense that even the water molecules themselves are forced close together. The water at the bottom of the Mariana Trench is actually about 5% denser than the water at the surface. If you were to take a standard hollow object, like a submarine with a regular steel hull, or a simple styrofoam cup, and send it down to the Challenger Deep, the pressure would not just flatten it, it would violently implode it into unrecognizable fragments within milliseconds. The physical environment is essentially a giant hydraulic press that never turns off. So how does this extreme physical force interact with organic matter? This is where the biological nightmare begins. All known life forms on Earth rely on a very specific set of biochemical rules, driven by complex molecules like proteins and lipids. Under normal conditions, these molecules function beautifully. But under 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, the fundamental laws of biochemistry begin to break down. Let us start with the cell membrane. Every living cell is encased in a protective barrier called a lipid bilayer. In a healthy cell at the surface, this membrane is fluid and flexible, operating with a physical consistency similar to olive oil at room temperature. This fluidity is absolutely crucial because it allows the cell to absorb nutrients, expel waste, and communicate with other cells. However, when you subject these lipid molecules to the extreme crushing force of the Mariana Trench, they are packed so tightly together that they physically change their state. The immense pressure forces the lipids to solidify. The membrane turns from a flexible fluid into a rigid solid, much like butter placed in a freezing refrigerator. When a cell membrane loses its flexibility, it shatters, and the cell dies instantly. But the physical assault on organic matter does not stop at the cell membrane. It goes much deeper, attacking the very engines of life, proteins. Proteins are incredibly complex molecules that act as the biological workers of the body, handling everything from digesting food to contracting muscles and repairing cellular damage. A protein only works if it is folded into a highly specific, intricate three-dimensional shape. This shape is maintained by delicate chemical bonds. Inside these complex folded structures there are naturally microscopic empty spaces or voids. Under normal atmospheric pressure, these empty spaces are perfectly stable. But under the intense hydrostatic pressure of the deep ocean, water molecules are driven like tiny microscopic wedges into these molecular voids. The sheer force of the surrounding water forces the protein to unravel and lose its three-dimensional shape. This catastrophic process is known as protein denaturation. It is the exact same chemical process that happens when you boil an egg, turning the clear liquid into a solid white mass, but down in the trench, it is caused by sheer pressure rather than heat. Once a protein unravels, it becomes completely useless. The biological machinery of the organism grinds to an immediate halt. Muscles cannot fire, stomachs cannot digest, and lungs or gills cannot process oxygen. Therefore, for any standard surface-dwelling organism, a trip to the bottom of the Mariana Trench is not just instantly fatal. It is a fundamental unmaking of their molecular structure. The pressure literally squeezes the life out of their cells by turning their protective walls to stone and unraveling the very molecules that keep them functioning. To survive in this environment, any creature would have to completely reinvent its molecular biology from the ground up. And as we will soon see, that is exactly what the strange residents of the deep have managed to do. If the extreme hydrostatic pressure of the Mariana Trench acts as a relentless biological hydraulic press, how does anything survive without being instantly annihilated? The answer lies not in physical armor, but in sophisticated chemical warfare. To combat the microscopic destruction of cell membranes and the unraveling of vital proteins, Deep-sea organisms have evolved an ingenious biochemical defense mechanism. They do not build stronger bones or thicker skin. Instead, they completely alter the chemical composition of their intracellular fluids. The battle for survival in the abyss is won or lost entirely at the nanometer scale. To understand this, we must first look at the thermodynamics of biology. Biological systems are governed by a principle in chemistry known as Le Chatelier's principle. This principle states that when a system at equilibrium is subjected to an increase in pressure, the system will shift to favour the state that occupies less physical volume. Here is the problem for organic life. A perfectly folded, functioning protein actually takes up more space than an unfolded, dead protein because of the microscopic empty voids trapped inside its complex three-dimensional structure. Therefore, under the crushing weight of 1,000 atmospheres, the laws of thermodynamics actively force proteins to unfold to save space. To prevent their internal biological machinery from shutting down, deep-sea creatures must introduce a chemical agent that fundamentally manipulates how water interacts with organic matter. Enter the chemical savior of the abyss, a small, remarkably simple molecule known as trimethylamine N oxide, or TMAO for short. If you have ever visited a fish market and noticed that distinct pungent fishy smell, you're already intimately familiar with TMAO. In shallow water marine life, this molecule exists in relatively small amounts to help regulate basic salt balance. However, as marine biologists began to sample species from increasingly extreme depths, they noticed a striking correlation. The deeper the fish lived, the higher the concentration of TMAO in its muscle tissues. In the crushing depths of the Hadal zone, this molecule is pumped into the cellular fluid in massive, highly concentrated quantities. TMAO is classified as a pisolite, which translates literally to a pressure-resisting molecule. Its chemical structure consists of a central nitrogen atom bonded to an oxygen atom and 3 methyl groups, chemically written in standard text as CH3 3NO. But its magic lies primarily in its profound electrical interaction with water. Normally, water molecules, H2O, form a dynamic, constantly shifting network of hydrogen bonds. But under extreme hydrostatic pressure, this network is violently compressed, forcing individual water molecules to invade the microscopic voids inside folded proteins like tiny wedges, pushing the protein structure apart from the inside out. TMAO stops this catastrophic unraveling by acting as a chemical force field. Because the oxygen atom in the TMAO molecule carries a strong negative charge, it acts like a molecular magnet. It binds to water molecules much more tightly than water molecules bind to each other. When an organism floods its cells with TMAO, these molecules create an incredibly dense, highly organized cage of water directly surrounding the proteins. Even under the unimaginable weight of the ocean above, the water molecules are locked in place by the TMAO, preventing them from being wedged into the vulnerable folds of the protein structure. The internal empty spaces of the protein remain perfectly intact, and the biological machinery continues to function seamlessly. It is a brilliant evolutionary workaround. If you cannot physically fight the force of the pressure, you simply manipulate the chemistry of the water transmitting that pressure. But protecting proteins is only half the battle. As we established earlier, the crushing pressure also forces the flexible lipid bilayer of cell membranes to pack tightly together and solidify into a rigid, impenetrable wall. A cell with a frozen membrane is a dead cell, unable to absorb nutrients, expel toxic waste, or fire electrical signals. To combat this, creatures of the deep employ a secondary biochemical strategy known as homeoviscous adaptation. If the pressure is trying to freeze their membranes, they must change the building blocks of the membrane itself to artificially lower its freezing point. They achieve this by packing their cell walls with incredibly high levels of specific polyunsaturated fatty acids such as EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. Unlike saturated fats, which have straight molecular tails that pack tightly together and solidify easily, These highly unsaturated fats feature multiple molecular kinks, or sharp bends in their carbon chains. These structural kinks act like tiny physical spacers, actively preventing the lipid molecules from packing too closely together, even when aggressively squeezed by 1,000 atmospheres of hydrostatic pressure. Working in perfect tandem with the high concentrations of TMAO, these chemically kinked lipids ensure that the cell membranes remain beautifully fluid. They operate with the smooth, permeable consistency of liquid oil, despite existing in an environment that should theoretically turn them to stone. However, the universe is governed by harsh trade-offs, and this heavy reliance on TMAO comes with a fatal biological catch. There is a strict mathematical limit to how much of this chemical a living vertebrate cell can tolerate. TMAO is a highly osmotic molecule, meaning it aggressively draws water toward itself. Standard teleost fish, bony fishes, naturally have blood that is significantly less salty than the surrounding seawater. As these fish evolve to live deeper, they must pack more and more TMAO into their tissues to survive the increasing pressure, which inadvertently makes their internal fluid saltier and more concentrated. By the time a fish reaches a depth of approximately 8,200 to 8,400 meters, its internal TMAO concentration becomes so high that its internal cellular fluid exactly matches the osmolality of the seawater outside. If a fish were to go any deeper and add even more TMAO to its cells to survive the pressure at 11,000 meters, its internal fluids would become intensely hyperosmotic. This would trigger a fatal biological reaction. The surrounding seawater would violently rush into their bodies through osmosis, causing their cells to literally swell and burst from the inside. This precise biochemical threshold dictates a hard, unbreakable limit for vertebrate life. It is the exact reason why no true fish can ever reach the very bottom of the Challenger Deep. The absolute deepest regions of the trench are strictly reserved for specialized invertebrates, which utilize entirely different alien osmotic strategies to conquer the final few thousand meters of the abyss. As we descend past the 1,000 meter mark, the last scattered photons of sunlight completely fade away. We enter the midnight zone, a realm of absolute unbroken darkness. In an environment where you cannot see your prey, and your prey cannot see you, actively hunting becomes a dangerous waste of precious energy. Swimming blindly through the void in search of a meal burns calories that a deep-sea organism simply cannot afford to replace. To survive the severe caloric deficit of the deep ocean, the most successful predators do not chase their food. They make their food come to them. No creature exemplifies this strategy of lethal deception better than the deep-sea anglerfish. With its nightmarish silhouette, jagged translucent teeth, and a glowing beacon hovering in the dark, the anglerfish is the undisputed icon of the abyss. But beneath its terrifying appearance lies a staggering mastery of biochemistry and evolutionary biology. The anglerfish does not merely survive in the dark, it weaponizes the darkness. To understand the genius of the anglerfish, we must first examine its most famous anatomical feature, the biological fishing rod. Evolution has remarkably modified the first dorsal fin spine of the female anglerfish, migrating it forward over millions of years until it sits directly above her mouth. This elongated, flexible spine is known biologically as the elysium. At the very tip of the elysium rests a fleshy, specialized organ called the esker. The esker is the lure, the glowing beacon that attracts curious prey straight into the cavernous jaws of the predator. However, the most fascinating scientific truth about the anglerfish is that it does not actually produce its own light. The fish itself is completely incapable of bioluminescence. Instead, the esker acts as a highly advanced biological reactor, designed specifically to house and cultivate millions of microscopic light-emitting bacteria. This relationship is a masterpiece of symbiotic biochemistry. The primary bacteria involved often belong to the genus Vibrio, specifically adapted bioluminescent strains that drift freely in the pitch-black water column. When a female anglerfish is born, her esker is dark and completely sterile. It possesses a tiny open pore that connects the internal chamber of the lure to the surrounding ocean. The young anglerfish must capture the correct species of free-floating bioluminescent bacteria from the seawater. The exact chemical mechanism of how the fish filters and selects the correct glowing bacteria while rejecting harmful pathogens remains one of the great mysteries of marine biology. However, scientists believe the internal walls of the esker secrete highly specific chemical attractants and nutrients that only the desired glowing bacteria can metabolize. Once the correct bacteria enter the chamber through the pore, they multiply exponentially, feeding on the rich biological broth provided by the host fish. The chemistry of the light production itself is a marvel of molecular efficiency. The bacteria generate light through a chemical reaction involving a light-emitting substrate molecule called luciferin and a catalytic enzyme called luciferase. When these molecules interact in the presence of molecular oxygen, the chemical bonds of the luciferin are excited and then stabilize, releasing their excess energy not as heat, but as pure cold photons of light. In the terrestrial world, generating light usually means generating immense heat, like an incandescent light bulb. But this biological reaction is almost 100% efficient, meaning no thermal energy is wasted. This cold light is critical. If the reaction produced heat, the esker would essentially cook itself from the inside out. But a constant unblinking glow is not always the best way to attract prey. A flashing, pulsating light is much more effective at mimicking the erratic movements of tiny bioluminescent crustaceans, which are the primary food source for many deep-sea fish. Since the bacteria are constantly glowing as long as they have fuel, the anglerfish needs a way to control the switch. It cannot neurologically turn the bacteria off. Instead, it controls the light using cardiovascular mechanics. The esker is lined with an incredibly dense network of microscopic blood vessels. Because the bacterial chemical reaction requires molecular oxygen to occur, the fish can act as a biological dimmer switch. By constricting her blood vessels, the fish cuts off the supply of oxygenated blood to the esker. Deprived of oxygen, the chemical reaction stops and the lure plunges into darkness. By suddenly dilating the vessels, a rush of oxygen hits the bacterial colony and the light flares back to life. Furthermore, the interior of the esker is lined with microscopic reflective crystals made of guanine, the exact same chemical substance found in the scales of silver fish. These internal crystals act like the parabolic mirror inside a flashlight, catching the scattered bacterial light and directing it outward in a concentrated, piercing beam. While the anglerfish's method of feeding is a biological triumph, finding food in the deep sea is only half the battle. The true existential crisis of the abyss is reproduction. The bathypelagic and abyssopelagic zones represent the largest single habitat on Earth, a three-dimensional volume of water so vast that the population density of any given species is vanishingly small. The statistical probability of a male and a female anglerfish of the exact same species randomly bumping into each other in the pitch-black void is almost zero. If the anglerfish relied on standard reproductive strategies, the species would have gone extinct millions of years ago. To solve the mathematical impossibility of finding a mate, evolution engineered one of the most extreme and disturbing reproductive strategies on the planet. Extreme sexual dimorphism leading to absolute parasitic fusion. When we picture an anglerfish, we are exclusively picturing the female. The male deep-sea anglerfish is a radically different creature. He is microscopic by comparison, sometimes measuring only a few millimeters in length, effectively making him hundreds of thousands of times smaller than his female counterpart. The male has no glowing lure. He has no fully developed digestive tract. His jaw is tiny and completely unsuited for capturing prey. In fact, from the moment he hatches, the male is on a strict biological countdown. He cannot feed himself, meaning he must find a female before his internal energy reserves run out and he starves to death in the cold. To achieve this singular mission, the male is equipped with a sensory apparatus that pushes the limits of biology. While his eyes are highly adapted to spot the specific flashing rhythm of a female's glowing lure from a distance, his primary weapon is his sense of smell. The male's head is dominated by massive olfactory organs. He is essentially a swimming pair of nostrils attached to a muscular tail. The female anglerfish releases incredibly potent, species-specific chemical pheromones into the water column. The male uses his enormous olfactory receptors to detect these chemical trails at concentrations of just a few molecules per million. Once he catches the scent, he swims desperately upstream against the chemical gradient, following the invisible molecular highway through the dark until he finally locates the giant female. What happens next is where the biology of the anglerfish transitions from fascinating to deeply terrifying. When the male finally reaches the female, he bites into her flesh. His jaws are uniquely designed with specialized pincer-like teeth that lock onto her skin, ensuring that once he bites, he can never let go. The moment his teeth sink in, a radical biological transformation begins. The male releases highly potent digestive enzymes from his mouth that begin to literally melt his own lips and the female's skin. The physical barrier between the two organisms dissolves. At the microscopic level, the tiny capillary blood vessels of the male's mouth actively seek out and physically fuse with the blood vessels in the female's skin, a biological process known as anastomosis. Within days, their circulatory systems become one. The male begins to draw all of his oxygen and nutrients directly from the female's bloodstream. This permanent physical fusion presents a massive paradox in the field of immunology. In almost all vertebrate animals, the immune system is ruthlessly efficient at identifying and destroying foreign tissue. If a human receives an organ transplant, their immune system will attack the new organ, unless suppressed by heavy medication. This biological defense is managed by the adaptive immune system, specifically a complex network of proteins called the Major Histocompatibility Complex, or MHC, alongside killer T cells and specialized antibodies. The female anglerfish's immune system should immediately recognize the biting male as a foreign parasite, flood the bite site with white blood cells, and aggressively reject his tissue, causing him to rot and fall off. So, why does the female not reject the male? Recent sequencing of the anglerfish genome has revealed a shocking evolutionary trade-off. To allow for this permanent parasitic mating, the deep-sea anglerfish has essentially crippled its own immune system. Scientists discovered that these fish have entirely lost the genes required to produce functional killer T cells. Furthermore, they have discarded the genetic instructions for creating specific protective antibodies. In any surface-dwelling vertebrate, this severe lack of adaptive immunity would be instantly fatal. The animal would quickly die from the first bacterial or viral infection it encountered. But the deep ocean is a radically different environment. Because the deep sea is so incredibly cold, dark, and isolated, the concentration of infectious pathogens is remarkably low. The anglerfish has gambled its biological defenses, trading a robust immune system for the absolute certainty of reproductive success. By turning off its immune rejection protocols, the female accepts the male's tissue as if it were her own. Once the bloodstreams are permanently joined, the ultimate sacrifice of the male begins. Connected to a limitless supply of nutrients from the female's massive body, the male no longer needs his own internal organs to survive. In a brutal display of biological efficiency, the male's body undergoes severe degeneration. His large, highly evolved eyes dissolve away. His fins wither and fall off. His intestinal tract is completely reabsorbed into his body. Most astonishingly, his brain and central nervous system shrink until they are practically non-existent. He completely loses all individual autonomy, effectively ceasing to be an independent living animal. The male is reduced to nothing more than a fleshy lump hanging off the side of the female, completely sustained by her pumping heart. He becomes a permanent, living, sperm-producing appendage. The only organs within his body that continue to grow and develop are his reproductive testes. This parasitic fusion creates a biological chimera, a single organism containing the genetic material of two distinct individuals. Furthermore, a single massive female does not have to stop at just one mate. It is entirely common for biologists to pull up female anglerfish adorned with 3, 4, or even half a dozen completely fused, degenerated males hanging from her underbelly like grotesque ornaments. This horrifying but brilliantly effective system completely solves the reproductive crisis of the deep sea void. The female never has to waste energy searching for a mate when she's ready to spawn. She carries a permanent lifetime supply of sperm fused directly into her own circulatory system. Whenever the environmental conditions are right and the female is ready to release her eggs into the dark water, her body sends a hormonal chemical signal coursing through her blood. Because the males share her bloodstream, their dormant testes receive the hormonal trigger simultaneously. The degenerated male appendages release their sperm into the water at the exact precise millisecond that the female releases her eggs, ensuring perfect fertilization in the abyss. It is a terrifying, beautiful display of evolutionary pragmatism, sacrificing individuality, organs, and immunity, all for the sake of continuing the biological lineage in a world without sunlight. As we leave the domain of the anglerfish and glide over the muddy, desolate slopes of the bathypelagic zone, we encounter a predator that looks like a tragic mistake of nature. With its pale, flabby body, an absurdly long, flattened snout extending far beyond its face, and a mouth full of jagged, crooked teeth, the goblin shark appears clumsy and weak. It is a creature so bizarrely proportioned that when the first specimens were pulled to the surface in the late 19th century, many marine biologists assumed they were deformed mutations. The goblin shark is typically a pale, ghostly pink. However, this is not due to pink pigmentation. The shark entirely lacks the melanin pigment that gives surface sharks their dark grey colours. What you're actually seeing is the oxygen-rich blood coursing through its veins, entirely visible through its translucent gelatinous skin. To the untrained eye, this slow-moving, flaccid animal looks entirely unsuited for capturing prey. But in the deep sea, appearances are profoundly deceptive. The goblin shark is an apex predator, and its bizarre anatomy is a masterpiece of extreme biological engineering, perfectly optimized to solve two massive physical challenges: finding prey that cannot be seen and catching prey underwater without pushing it away. In the abyssal mud, the primary food sources such as deep-sea crustaceans, squid, and bottom-dwelling teleost fish do not swim in the open. They burrow deep into the soft sediment to hide from predators. In this environment, vision is completely useless. Even olfaction, the powerful sense of smell that surface sharks rely on, is insufficient. Smell can tell a predator that a crab is generally nearby, but it cannot pinpoint the exact millimeter coordinates of a crab buried beneath 10 centimeters of thick mud. To find a meal, the goblin shark must sense the very spark of life itself. Life is, at its fundamental core, an electrical phenomenon. Every time a buried fish twitches a muscle, every time a crab moves a leg, and every time a heart beats, biological electricity is generated. These movements rely on the rapid exchange of charged particles, specifically sodium and potassium ions, rushing back and forth across cellular membranes. Even a completely motionless fish must breathe, continuously pumping water over its gills, which generates a faint rhythmic electrical field in the surrounding water. To detect these microscopic electrical signatures, the goblin shark has evolved an incredibly specialized tool: its massive sword-like snout, scientifically known as the rostrum. The rostrum is not used for stabbing or digging. It is a highly advanced biological antenna. The entire surface of the rostrum is densely perforated with thousands of tiny dark pores called the ampullae of Lorenzini. While all sharks possess these organs, the goblin shark has taken them to an evolutionary extreme, maximizing the surface area of its snout to pack in as many sensors as possible. The internal structure of these ampullae is a marvel of biophysics. Each microscopic pore on the skin leads into a long, narrow canal, that terminates in a blind sac lined with highly sensitive receptor cells. This entire canal is filled with a remarkable, perfectly clear biological hydrogel. This jelly is a complex glycoprotein matrix, and it possesses a physical property that continues to baffle material scientists. It is the most highly conductive biological material ever discovered. It is vastly more electrically conductive than the surrounding seawater. This jelly acts as a flawless proton conductor. When a hidden shrimp moves its tail in the mud, it creates a minute electrical voltage gradient in the water, often measuring only a few billionths of a volt or nanovolts. The highly conductive jelly inside the shark's pores captures this unbelievably faint electrical wave and channels it with absolute zero electrical resistance straight down to the sensory cells at the base of the canal. These sensory cells then perform a rapid chemical translation, converting the voltage drop into a neurological spike that fires directly into the shark's brain. The goblin shark does not need to see its prey. It literally feels the electrical rhythm of a beating heart through the solid mud. As it drifts silently over the sea floor, its elongated snout sweeps back and forth like a high-tech metal detector, mapping the buried electrical fields of the abyss. However, detecting the precise location of the hidden prey is only the first phase of the hunt. The second phase, the actual strike, presents a massive hydrodynamic problem. Water is roughly 800 times denser than air and possesses a high degree of viscosity. When a large, solid object moves rapidly forward underwater, it cannot simply pass through the fluid. It must forcefully displace the water in front of it. This creates a high-pressure wave of displaced water moving ahead of the object, known in fluid dynamics as a bow wave. If you try to rapidly punch an object submerged in a swimming pool, your fist pushes a wall of water ahead of it, which often blows the target away before your knuckles ever make contact. For a massive shark, this hydrodynamic law is a nightmare. If the goblin shark were to lunge its large, bulky head down into the mud to grab a shrimp, the massive bow wave generated by its skull would act like an invisible snowplow. The sheer physical force of the displaced water would violently blast the lightweight prey out of its hiding spot and tumble it out of reach before the teeth could close. To defeat the physics of fluid resistance, the goblin shark has evolved a jaw mechanism unlike any other vertebrate on the planet. Most vertebrate animals, including humans, have lower jaws that hinge directly from a fixed point on the skull. The goblin shark has completely decoupled its jaw from its cranium. Its upper and lower jaws are entirely detached from the brain case, suspended beneath the skull by a highly complex interconnected web of elastic ligaments and specialized double-jointed cartilages. When the shark is just cruising or resting, its jaw is folded tightly backward and upward, resting completely flush against its throat. In this resting state, the heavy elastic ligaments connecting the jaw to the skull are pulled taut, stretched to their absolute physical limit. This biological configuration is heavily storing potential mechanical energy, operating on the exact same physical principle as pulling back the thick rubber band of a slingshot and holding it under immense tension. The jaw is physically locked into this high-tension state by a specialized cartilaginous joint near the pachyal, which is the anatomical equivalent to the root of the tongue. When the biological metal detector of the rostrum picks up the electrical heartbeat of a hidden fish, the goblin shark positions itself perfectly above the target, but instead of swimming forward and accelerating its massive body, the shark remains completely motionless. It simply releases the biological locking mechanism in its throat. In a fraction of a second, the massive amount of potential energy stored in the stretched ligaments is violently converted into kinetic energy. The entire jaw structure, the upper teeth, the lower teeth, the gums, and the supporting cartilages, detaches from the underside of the head and violently catapults forward. This is the fastest, most dramatic jaw protrusion of any known species of shark. The jaw shoots outward at a staggering velocity of over 3 meters per second, projecting up to 10% of the shark's entire body length away from its face. But the true genius of this ballistic strike is hydrodynamic efficiency. Because only the narrow skeletal frame of the jaw and the needle-like teeth are moving forward, rather than the bulky, water-displacing mass of the shark's entire head, there is virtually zero water displaced. The jaw is a low-profile skeletal frame that slices cleanly through the viscous fluid. Because there is no massive surface area moving forward, no bow wave is generated. The invisible wall of high-pressure water that would normally push the prey away is completely bypassed. Before the buried fish's nervous system even has the milliseconds required to register the microscopic disturbance in the water, the goblin shark's jaw has already shot through the mud. The long, incredibly sharp, inward-curving teeth operate like an interlocking cage, snagging the prey securely. The moment the teeth lock shut, a secondary set of powerful retractor muscles instantly engages, violently pulling the entire jaw structure backward, dragging the struggling prey straight out of the mud and directly into the shark's esophagus. The jaw then locks back into its resting position against the throat, resetting the deadly biological slingshot. Why did nature engineer such a terrifyingly complex and bizarre feeding mechanism? Once again, the answer lies in the unforgiving economics of the deep ocean. The goblin shark is not built for high-speed pursuit. It cannot chase down fast-moving squid like a great white shark chases seals. Its muscles are soft and watery, its skeleton is poorly calcified to save weight, and its heart is small. To maintain neutral buoyancy in the water column, it possesses a massive liver that accounts for up to a quarter of its entire body weight. This liver is completely saturated with a low-density hydrocarbon oil called squalene. This internal oil reservoir allows the goblin shark to achieve perfect neutral buoyancy, enabling it to hover completely motionless in the water, expending absolutely zero physical energy just to stay afloat. In an environment where a single meal might have to sustain the animal for months, burning calories is a death sentence. The goblin shark has optimized its biology for maximum lethality with minimum effort. By combining the hypersensitive electrical radar of the ampullae of Lorenzini with the zero-drag ballistic projection of the slingshot jaw, the goblin shark can passively drift like a ghost in the dark. It never has to waste precious energy hunting, chasing, or lunging. It simply waits for the electrical hum of the abyss to reveal a target, and lets the stored mechanical tension of its ligaments do all the deadly work. It is the ultimate low-energy assassin, a creature perfectly moulded by the physics of the Hadal zone. As we move away from the muddy slopes and venture into the freezing mid-water column of the abyssal and bathypelagic zones, we encounter a fundamentally different set of physical challenges. Here, in the frigid depths, we do not find the fragile, translucent bodies of the sea floor. Instead, we encounter the titans of the dark. We are entering the domain of the heaviest and most formidable invertebrate on planet Earth, the colossal squid. Scientifically known as Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, this creature is often confused with the giant squid, but it is an entirely different biological engine. While the giant squid is longer and more slender, the colossal squid is built for sheer immovable mass. Reaching lengths of up to 14 meters and weighing a staggering 500 kilograms, it is a creature that defies the seemingly barren nature of its environment. The existence of such a massive predator in the deep ocean presents marine biologists with a severe logical paradox. At the surface of the ocean, sunlight drives photosynthesis, creating dense blooms of phytoplankton that support massive food webs. The surface is an all-you-can-eat buffet, which naturally supports the growth of giant animals like baleen whales. But in the deep ocean, there is no sunlight, no photosynthesis, and very little food. The deep sea is a biological desert, relying almost entirely on the slow, meager drift of dead organic matter sinking from above. In an environment where every calorie is incredibly rare and hard to find, logic dictates that animals should evolve to be as small as possible to minimize their energy requirements. Yet, across various species in the deep ocean, from crustaceans to cephalopods, we see the exact opposite. This evolutionary phenomenon is known as abyssal gigantism, and its explanation lies at the complex intersection of thermodynamics, metabolic biochemistry, and fluid dynamics. To understand why the colossal squid grows so massive, we must first look at the temperature of the water. The deep waters of the Southern Ocean, where the colossal squid reigns, are punishingly cold, constantly hovering around 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. In biochemistry, there is a fundamental metric called the Q-Tangier temperature coefficient. This coefficient measures how much the rate of a biological or chemical reaction changes when the temperature is increased or decreased by 10 degrees. In almost all cold-blooded animals, biological reactions are highly temperature dependent. Because the water in the abyss is near freezing, the cellular metabolism of the colossal squid grinds to an incredibly slow pace. Its heart beats only a few times per minute. Its digestive enzymes operate at a fraction of the speed of surface-dwelling squids. Its muscles contract slowly. Because its entire biological engine is running on idle, the colossal squid burns very few calories just to stay alive. A standard fast-moving surface squid might live for only 1 or 2 years, burning out its energetic reserves in a frantic dash to reproduce. But the deep-sea colossal squid, with its metabolically frozen biology, lives a much slower, longer life. This extended lifespan allows for decades of slow, continuous, indeterminate growth. However, slow metabolism is only one piece of the puzzle. The true energetic secret of abyssal gigantism is explained by a biological rule of scaling known as Kleiber's law. Kleiber's law dictates that an animal's metabolic rate does not scale linearly with its body mass. Instead, it scales to the 3/4 power of the animal's mass. In simple terms, this means that while a massive animal requires more total food than a small animal, it requires significantly less food per gram of body tissue. A 500 kilogram squid is infinitely more energy efficient than 501 kilogram squids. By evolving a massive bulky body, the colossal squid radically decreases its surface area to volume ratio. This massive volume allows the squid to store massive energy reserves when it does manage to secure a large meal, sustaining it through the long famine-like stretches of the deep ocean winter. Furthermore, cold water possesses a chemical property that actively supports massive body sizes. It holds significantly more dissolved molecular oxygen than warm water. One of the primary biological limits on the body size of aquatic invertebrates is how efficiently they can pull oxygen from the water and transport it through their tissues. In warm, oxygen-poor surface waters, a giant invertebrate would essentially suffocate under its own mass. But in the freezing, oxygen-saturated depths of the Southern Ocean, this respiratory bottleneck is completely removed. The cold water acts as a high-density oxygen reservoir, allowing the squid's immense fleshy mantle to be fully oxygenated without the animal having to constantly swim to flush water over its gills. But carrying 500 kilograms of muscle and tissue presents a massive hydrodynamic problem: gravity. If a terrestrial animal weighed 500 kilograms, it would need thick, heavy bones to support its weight. The colossal squid has no bones. In the water, an animal this heavy should theoretically sink like a stone into the abyssal mud. If the squid had to constantly use its muscles and its siphon to swim upward and fight gravity, it would quickly exhaust its precious energy reserves and starve. To conquer gravity without burning calories, the colossal squid utilizes a masterpiece of chemical engineering. It fundamentally alters the biochemical composition of its own flesh. Instead of relying on a gas-filled swim bladder, which would be instantly crushed by the hydrostatic pressure, the colossal squid saturates its muscle tissues and specialized internal fluid chambers with a highly concentrated solution of ammonium chloride. In the chemistry of fluid dynamics, ammonium is significantly lighter and less dense than standard seawater. By flooding its body with this buoyant chemical compound, the colossal squid achieves perfect neutral buoyancy. It becomes essentially weightless. It can hover completely motionless in the dark water column for days at a time, expending absolutely zero mechanical energy, waiting patiently for an ambush. This biological reliance on ammonia is incredibly effective, though it comes with a chemical side effect. If a human were to taste the flesh of a colossal squid, it would be overwhelmingly bitter and smell intensely of heavy industrial bleach. When prey does finally approach, the colossal squid does not rely on the simple suction cups used by smaller squids. The arms and the two massive feeding tentacles of the colossal squid are equipped with a horrifying biological weapon system. Instead of standard suckers, the ends of its tentacles are lined with dozens of large, incredibly sharp, three-pointed biological hooks made of a rigid biopolymer called chitin. These are not static hooks. They are mounted on highly muscular swiveling bases. They can rotate a full 360 degrees. When the squid strikes, it does not just grab its prey, it embeds these swiveling meat hooks deep into the flesh. If the prey struggles and twists to escape, the hooks freely rotate with the movement, ensuring they never tear out, locking the target into an inescapable, agonizing embrace. Yet despite its massive size, its chemical buoyancy, and its swiveling biological hooks, the most mathematically astounding feature of the colossal squid is its visual system. The colossal squid possesses the largest eyes in the entire history of the animal kingdom. A single eye can measure up to 27 centimeters across, roughly the size of a standard regulation basketball or a very large dinner plate. To understand why an animal living in absolute darkness would invest so much biological energy into growing such massive eyes, we must analyze the strict optical physics of light attenuation in water. In the open air, light travels for millions of miles with very little interference. But water is an incredibly dense optical medium. As photons of light enter the ocean, they collide with water molecules and suspended particles, causing them to scatter and be absorbed. This process is called attenuation. Water absorbs the longer wavelengths of light first. Red, orange, and yellow light completely disappear within the first 50 meters. By the time you reach the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones, the only ambient light remaining is a vanishingly faint ghostly blue. To see anything in this environment, a biological eye must function like a deep space telescope, designed not for clarity, but for the absolute maximum collection of scarce photons. The pupil of the colossal squid's eye is an astounding 8 to 9 centimeters wide. In optical physics, the light-gathering power of an aperture, whether it is a camera lens, a telescope, or a biological pupil, increases with the square of its radius. By evolving a pupil the size of an orange, the colossal squid's eye can capture hundreds of times more photons than a human eye in the exact same lighting conditions. But the massive pupil is only the entry point. Behind the biological lens lies a massive retina, packed with a density of photoreceptor cells that pushes the limits of cellular biology. However, there is a strict physiological trade-off in visual architecture. You can either build an eye optimized for high-resolution, sharply focused images, or you can build an eye optimized for extreme light sensitivity, but you cannot have both. In the absolute dark of the abyss, high resolution is useless because there is nothing to look at. The colossal squid has sacrificed visual acuity in favor of maximum photon capture. Its visual processing system utilizes a neurological mechanism called spatial summation. Instead of each individual photoreceptor cell sending a distinct, separate signal to the brain, thousands of adjacent photoreceptor cells wire their signals together and feed into a single, massive ganglion cell. This effectively pools the faint light signals together, amplifying the electrical pulse sent to the brain. The resulting image the squid sees is likely incredibly blurry, lacking any fine detail or sharp edges, but it is astronomically sensitive to the faintest glimmer of contrast or bioluminescence. This brings us to the ultimate question. What is the colossal squid looking for with its basketball-sized eyes? It is not looking for small fish or tiny bioluminescent shrimp. A massive eye requires a massive amount of metabolic energy to maintain, and the laws of biological economics dictate that such an expensive organ must serve a critical survival purpose. The colossal squid's giant eyes evolved for one highly specific reason: to serve as a biological early warning radar against its only true predator, the massive sperm whale. Sperm whales regularly dive to depths of over 2,000 meters specifically to hunt the colossal squid. In the pitch black, the whale uses highly advanced acoustic echolocation to find the squid, bombarding the darkness with powerful biological sonar clicks. The squid cannot hear these clicks, nor can it fight a 50-ton mammalian predator. Its only defense is to see the whale coming before the whale's sonar locks on. But how do you see a dark grey whale in a pitch-black ocean? The answer lies in the microscopic ecosystem of the water column. The deep ocean is filled with billions of microscopic organisms such as dinoflagellates and small copepods, which possess the ability to bioluminesce. When these tiny organisms are physically disturbed by the movement of water, they emit a bright flash of blue light. When a 50-ton sperm whale swims through this environment, it displaces a massive amount of water. This violent hydrodynamic disturbance triggers a chain reaction of bioluminescence in the microscopic plankton, creating a massive glowing blue wake outlining the shape of the moving whale. The colossal squid's optical system is perfectly calibrated to the exact blue wavelength of this bioluminescence, which peaks around 470 to 480 nanometers. Its massive eyes are mathematically optimized to detect large, faint glowing shapes moving through the dark. Optical modeling by marine biologists suggests that with its basketball-sized eyes, the colossal squid can detect the glowing hydrodynamic wake of an approaching sperm whale from a distance of over 120 meters away. This provides the squid with the precious few seconds it needs to flush water through its siphon and propel its 500-kilogram body out of the path of the diving mammal. In the brutal, freezing depths of the Southern Ocean, the colossal squid's survival depends entirely on the flawless integration of chemical buoyancy, scaled thermodynamics, and the extreme optical physics of the largest eyes on Earth. As we descend even deeper into the abyss, leaving behind the midwater titans, the ocean becomes increasingly desolate. We enter the realm of the abyssopelagic zone, a lightless void stretching from 4,000 to 6,000 meters below the surface. In this extreme environment, the violent explosive strikes of the goblin shark and the massive physical bulk of the colossal squid give way to a different kind of survival strategy. Here, energy is so unbelievably scarce that moving at all is a luxury. The most successful organisms in this domain are those that have mastered the art of doing absolutely nothing. And no creature exemplifies this terrifying passive mastery better than the magna pinna, commonly known as the big-finned squid. When remote-operated vehicles, or ROVs, first captured high-definition footage of the magna pinna in the late 1990s and early 2000s, marine biologists were left entirely speechless. The creature drifting across the monitors did not look like a squid, nor did it look like any known biological organism on Earth. It looked like an eerie, suspended marionette or an extraterrestrial tripod floating in the dark. Its appearance is so profoundly unsettling and biomechanically strange that it forces us to completely re-evaluate the spatial geometry and fluid dynamics of deep-sea hunting. To understand the genius of the magna pinna, we must first analyze its most striking alien feature, its impossible biological posture. Standard squids, from the shallow water calamari to the giant squid, operate on a linear geometric plane. Their arms and tentacles extend directly forward from their face, creating a streamlined, torpedo-like shape optimized for forward propulsion and rapid strikes. The big-fin squid has completely abandoned this linear geometry. Instead, it utilizes a highly complex three-dimensional structural framework. When the magna pinna assumes its hunting posture, it spreads its 10 arms and tentacles radially outward from its body, perfectly parallel to the ocean floor. Then, at a specific point along each appendage, The arms abruptly bend downward at a harsh, mathematically precise 90-degree angle. This creates the appearance of bizarre biological elbows. From these elbows, incredibly thin, thread-like filaments drop straight down into the abyss, extending for a staggering 4 to 8 meters. Why has evolution engineered such a strange, angular posture? The answer lies in the mathematics of spatial geometry and the maximization of capture volume. If the squid were to simply let its 8-meter-long tentacles dangle straight down from its head like a jellyfish, the tentacles would cluster together. The total surface area of the ocean it could monitor would be restricted to a narrow single vertical column. Furthermore, the slightest ocean current would cause the incredibly long, sticky filaments to tangle into a useless knot. By pushing its elbows outward horizontally before dropping the filaments, the magpie fundamentally alters its hunting geometry. It transforms its capture zone from a narrow 2-dimensional line into a massive 3-dimensional cylinder. The horizontal spread creates a wide physical canopy, ensuring that each of the 10 trailing filaments is suspended with perfect spacing. This biological scaffolding prevents tangling and exponentially increases the volume of water the squid can actively monitor. The magpie effectively acts as a living suspended curtain of death, claiming a massive cylinder of the water column as its personal inescapable territory. But creating a massive biological net is only half the equation. The true predatory genius of the magpie lies in its absolute mastery of fluid dynamics and its ability to bypass the sensory alarms of its prey. In the deep sea, the primary food source for a drifting predator consists of small zooplankton, copepods, and tiny crustaceans. These creatures are entirely blind, but they are far from defenseless. They possess highly sensitive mechanoreceptors, tiny biological hairs that detect the microscopic changes in water pressure and fluid velocity caused by approaching objects. If a solid object like a fish's jaw or a standard squid tentacle moves through the water, it pushes a bow wave of high pressure ahead of it. The zooplankton feel this pressure wave milliseconds before impact and use rapid, darting reflexes to escape. The bigfin squid circumvents this entire sensory defense system through the extreme minimization of physical mass. The terminal filaments that hang from the squid's elbows are impossibly thin, often measuring only a few millimeters in diameter, despite being up to 8 meters long. In the study of fluid dynamics, the way fluid flows around an object is determined by its size and velocity, mathematically expressed as the Reynolds number. Because the filaments are so microscopic in diameter and remain completely motionless, they operate at an incredibly low Reynolds number. They slice through the viscous water with almost zero hydrodynamic resistance. When a microscopic copepod swims through the dark, it relies on its mechanoreceptors to feel the pressure waves of approaching predators. But the magpie's filaments are so thin that they simply do not displace enough water to create a detectable pressure wave. They are hydrodynamically invisible. The prey has absolutely no physical warning that a trap is present until the very millisecond it physically crashes into the filament. Once contact is made, escape is physically impossible. While scientists have yet to capture a live, perfectly intact magpie specimen to study its tentacles under an electron microscope, analyzing the footage and studying related deep-sea cephalopods provides a clear picture of the lethal mechanics at play. The extraordinarily long filaments are not smooth threads. They are likely lined with thousands of microscopic, highly specialized suckers. Furthermore, deep-sea passive predators heavily rely on chemical adhesives. The entire surface of these 8-meter threads is almost certainly coated in a highly viscous biological mucus. When a zooplankton bumps into the invisible thread, it is instantly glued in place. The more the prey struggles, vibrating its tiny appendages in a panic, the more entangled it becomes in the microscopic suckers and the bioadhesive slime. However, suspending an 8-meter-long, multi-tentacled biological net in the open ocean presents a massive biomechanical challenge. The ocean is not entirely still, deep-sea currents and internal waves constantly push and pull against suspended objects. If the Magna Pinna were constantly buffeted by currents, its delicate net would collapse, and it would burn through its lethal energy reserves just trying to maintain its posture. To solve this, the squid requires a perfectly stabilized, highly efficient anti-gravity engine. This brings us to the animal's namesake, the massive terminal fins located at the very top of its mantle. In a standard squid, the fins are relatively small, used merely for steering, while the powerful siphon provides the primary jet propulsion. Jet propulsion is fast, but it is astronomically expensive in terms of metabolic energy, requiring massive muscular contractions to forcefully expel water. The Magna Pinna has almost entirely abandoned jet propulsion. Its terminal fins are gigantic, accounting for up to 90% of the length of its entire mantle. These massive wing-like fins are highly muscular and flexible. Instead of explosive bursts of speed, the Magna Pinna uses these fins to generate continuous gentle undulations. By slowly rippling these massive fins, the squid achieves perfect, effortless hydrodynamic lift. It operates exactly like an underwater drone, utilizing perfectly calibrated rotors to hold a fixed position in the air. The massive surface area of the fins means the squid only has to twitch its muscles slightly to generate enough downward force to counteract the drag of its dragging tentacles. It can hover completely motionless in the water column for days, perfectly stabilized against the gentle abyssal currents, burning only a microscopic fraction of the calories required by a surface-dwelling squid. Yet, there is one final staggering biological hurdle the Magna Pinna must overcome: neurological transmission. If a zooplankton bumps into the very tip of a filament 8 meters away, how does the squid's brain know it caught something? In biological systems, nerve impulses travel at a finite speed. Sending a signal from the tip of an 8-meter tentacle all the way up to the brain, and then waiting for the brain to send a command back down the nerve fiber to pull the prey up, would introduce a massive neurological delay. In that fraction of a second, a larger, stronger prey item might manage to tear free from the sticky mucus. Cephalopods, however, possess a highly decentralized nervous system. In an octopus, for example, 2/3 of its neurons are not located in its brain, but are distributed throughout the nerve cords of its arms. The arms can literally think for themselves, reacting to stimuli and executing complex movements without ever consulting the central brain. It is highly probable that the Magna Pinna utilizes an extreme version of this peripheral nervous system. The 8-meter filaments act as autonomous self-regulating biological fishing lines. When a prey item hits the sticky filament, the localized nerve clusters embedded at that exact spot instantly register the chemical and mechanical disturbance. Without waiting for instructions from the central brain located meters away, the localized nerves trigger an immediate reflexive muscular contraction. The filament snaps tight, wrapping around the prey to secure it. Only then, once the prey is fully immobilized by the autonomous local nerves, does the central brain initiate the slow mechanical process of reeling the long filament upward, bringing the trapped meal to the waiting beak at the center of the geometric canopy. The Magna Pinna squid is not a monster. It is a profound masterpiece of thermodynamic and biomechanical efficiency. It has sacrificed the speed, the agility, and the aggressive nature of its shallow water cousins in order to conquer the ultimate void. By combining the three-dimensional geometric mathematics of a suspended cylinder, the extreme fluid dynamics of hydrodynamically invisible filaments, the low-energy drone-like hovering of its massive fins, and the decentralized neural autonomy of its tentacles, the big fin squid has perfectly solved the equation of survival in the abyss opelagic zone. It proves that in the deepest, most desolate environments on Earth, the most dangerous predator is not the one that chases you in the dark, but the one that simply waits for you to stumble into its invisible geometric web. As we leave the mid-water column and finally touch down on the abyssal plain, 4,000 meters below the surface, the landscape changes drastically. We're now hovering over a seemingly endless, desolate expanse of fine grey ooze and thick mud. In this absolute void where food is restricted to whatever dead organic material happens to drift down from the surface miles above, energy conservation is no longer just a survival strategy. It is the absolute governing law of biology. Every single calorie must be meticulously accounted for. In this realm of extreme biological austerity, luxury is a death sentence. And in the animal kingdom, there is no biological luxury more expensive than the gift of sight. This unforgiving economic reality has given rise to one of the most visually disturbing and scientifically fascinating creatures of the deep sea, the faceless cusk eel, scientifically known as Typhlonus nassus. When you first look at this fish, your brain struggles to process its anatomy. It possesses a sleek, tapering body similar to an eel, but its head is a bulbous, smooth, fleshy dome that completely lacks any defining facial features. There are no eyes, no visible nostrils, and no mouth on the front of its face. It looks like a blank biological canvas gliding silently over the mud. The sheer lack of a face is so profoundly unnatural to the human eye that when the crew of the HMS Challenger first dredged a specimen from the depths in the 1870s, it was considered a bizarre anomaly. However, the faceless fish is not a mutation or an anomaly. It is the pinnacle of minimalist evolutionary design. To understand why an animal would completely erase its own face, we must dive deep into the brutal, metabolic economics of the vertebrate eye. In the surface world, vision is arguably the most dominant and useful sense. However, biologically speaking, the eye is an astronomically expensive piece of organic machinery to build, and more importantly, to maintain. Neural tissue, particularly the retina, is incredibly greedy. In standard vertebrate animals, retinal tissue demands more molecular oxygen and consumes more metabolic energy per gram than almost any other tissue in the entire body, often rivaling or even exceeding the energy demands of the brain itself. To grasp why the eye is such an energetic black hole, we have to examine the biochemistry of photoreceptor cells, specifically the rod cells responsible for vision in low light. In a fascinating and somewhat counterintuitive quirk of vertebrate biology, photoreceptor cells actually expend significantly more energy in the dark than they do when exposed to light. This is due to a biochemical process known as the dark current. In total darkness, specialized ion channels in the membrane of the rod cell remain permanently open, allowing positively charged sodium ions to constantly flood into the cell. Because these ions are constantly leaking in, the cell must run millions of microscopic molecular engines known as sodium-potassium pumps to push the sodium back out and maintain the cell's electrical balance. These microscopic pumps are powered by adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, the fundamental energy currency of the living cell. When a photon of light strikes the eye, a chemical cascade causes these ion channels to forcefully snap shut. The leaking stops, the pumps get a temporary break, and the energy consumption drops. But down here on the abyssal plane, there are no photons of sunlight. The darkness is absolute and eternal. If a fish living in this environment were to possess standard, functioning eyes, those eyes would be perpetually trapped in the dark current state. The sodium-potassium pumps would have to run at maximum capacity, 24 hours a day, burning through massive reserves of ATP and oxygen, while providing absolutely zero visual information in return. Having eyes in the abyssal zone is the biological equivalent of running a massive industrial air conditioning unit with all the windows open during a freezing winter. It is a catastrophic, potentially fatal drain on the animal's limited metabolic budget. This brings us to the fascinating mechanics of regressive evolution. There is a common misconception that deep-sea animals lose their eyes simply because they do not use them, as if the organ merely withers away from neglect over a single lifetime. This is biologically incorrect. Evolution is a highly active, heavily mathematical process driven by genetic mutation and natural selection. Millions of years ago, The shallow water ancestors of the faceless fish had normal, fully functioning eyes. When these ancestral fish began to colonize the deeper, darker waters, they brought their expensive eyes with them. However, in every generation, random genetic mutations naturally occur. Occasionally a fish would be born with a genetic defect that stunted the growth of its eyes, perhaps a mutation in the PAX6 gene, which acts as the master control switch for eye development. In a sunlit coral reef, a fish born with tiny defective eyes would be quickly eaten by a predator, and that mutation would be immediately erased from the gene pool. But in the pitch-black abyss, where nobody can see anyway, being born blind is not a disadvantage. In fact, it is a massive evolutionary jackpot. The fish born with the genetic defect that prevented it from growing a full visual cortex and large retinas suddenly found itself with a massive surplus of metabolic energy. It did not have to waste precious ATP-pumping sodium ions in the dark. It did not have to route oxygen-rich blood to a useless organ. Because it conserved all of that energy, it could swim slightly longer, grow slightly larger, and most importantly produce more eggs and sperm than its large-eyed cousins. In the brutal mathematics of the deep sea, the blind fish won. Generation after generation, natural selection ruthlessly favored the fish with the smallest, most degraded visual systems. Over millions of years, the genes responsible for building the eyes accumulated mutations and degraded through a process called gene decay. Today, the faceless fish is not technically missing its eyes entirely. If you were to perform a meticulous dissection of its bulbous head, slicing through the thick layers of skin, scales, and subdermal tissue, you would find 2 microscopic, useless spheres of vestigial tissue buried deep inside the skull. The eyes have been evolutionarily buried alive, completely disconnected from the surface of the face, serving as nothing more than biological fossils of a sunlit past. By eliminating the eyes, the fish also completely restructured its skull. Without the need to maintain large orbital cavities or eye sockets to house the eyeballs, the skull was free to change shape, resulting in the smooth, bulbous, heavily reinforced dome we see today. But removing the most vital sensory organ creates an obvious paradox. If the faceless fish cannot see, how does it navigate the abyssal plain? And more importantly, how does it find food buried in the infinite stretch of mud? The answer lies in the neurological phenomenon of sensory substitution. When the faceless fish evolutionarily abandoned its visual system, the massive amount of processing power in its brain that was previously dedicated to the visual cortex did not just disappear. Instead, the brain rewired itself, reallocating that premium neurological real estate to process information from other senses. The fish essentially traded its vision for an extreme hypersensitive combination of touch and taste. This brings us to the bizarre placement of the animal's mouth. The mouth is not located at the front of the face. It is positioned underneath the head, heavily underslung like a biological vacuum cleaner. This ventral mouth is perfectly adapted for benthic foraging, which means feeding directly on the ocean floor. The faceless fish does not hunt in the water column. It swims with its body pitched downward, keeping its bulbous, blank face pointed forward as a bumper, while its underslung mouth glides mere millimeters above the abyssal mud. The fish's face and lower jaw are densely packed with thousands of highly specialized sensory pores. These pores are loaded with complex chemoreceptors, which are the biological equivalent of microscopic taste buds. However, these are not standard taste buds designed to tell if a meal is sweet or sour. They are highly calibrated chemical sensors designed to detect the microscopic amino acids, proteins, and metabolic waste products excreted by tiny polychaete worms, deep-sea crustaceans, and mollusks buried out of sight in the sediment. The faceless fish literally tastes the water, smelling the chemical aura of its hidden prey. Furthermore, the fish is equipped with mechanoreceptors distributed along its lateral line and across its face. These tactile sensors can detect the faintest physical vibrations in the water and the mud. If a small worm twitches its body beneath an inch of sediment, The physical pressure wave travels through the water and hits the fish's skin, instantly alerting it to the prey's exact coordinates. To assist in this blind hunt, the fish utilizes its highly modified fins. Many deep-sea bottom dwellers, including the cusk eels, possess specialized elongated pelvic or pectoral fins that hang down below their bodies like thin, fleshy fingers. These fin rays are also heavily innervated with taste and touch receptors. As the fish glides over the bottom, it drags these sensory filaments through the mud, essentially using its fins to blindly feel and taste the terrain ahead of it, much like a person navigating a dark room by running their hands along the wall. When the chemical and tactile sensors lock onto a buried food source, the underslung mouth snaps into action. The fish plunges its jaw into the soft sediment, taking in a massive mouthful of mud, worms, and organic debris. It then uses specialized gill rakers inside its throat to filter out the nutritious organic matter, expelling the useless grey mud back out through its gill slits. The faceless fish is a profound testament to the ruthless efficiency of deep-sea evolution. It challenges our fundamental understanding of what an animal should look like. To human sensibilities, a creature without a face is a nightmare, a symbol of something broken or incomplete. But in the crushing pressure and eternal darkness of the abyssal plain, the faceless fish is a masterpiece of thermodynamic engineering. It realized that in a world without light, the greatest weapon is not a sharp eye, but the willingness to let go of unnecessary luxuries. By burying its eyes, redesigning its skull, and learning to taste the dark, the faceless fish achieved absolute harmony with the most desolate environment on Earth. It is a creature that has perfectly adapted not by adding complexity, but by mastering the extreme art of biological subtraction. As we continue our journey across the vast, unbroken expanse of the abyssal plain, we witness the ultimate conclusion of deep-sea evolutionary economics. While the faceless cusk eel expends a minimal amount of energy gliding blindly over the mud, there is a creature down here that has realized even that slow, drifting movement is far too expensive. If the ultimate currency in the deep ocean is metabolic energy, the undisputed billionaire of the abyss is a creature that almost never moves at all. Hovering silently in the perpetual darkness, looking less like a biological organism and more like a piece of abandoned extraterrestrial machinery, is the tripod fish, known to marine biologists as Bathyptera grallator. When deep-sea submersibles first captured this animal on camera, scientists were mesmerized. The fish was not swimming. It was standing motionless on the ocean floor, elevated roughly a meter above the mud, supported by 3 incredibly long, impossibly thin biological stilts. It looked exactly like a lunar lander touching down on a desolate alien moon. To understand how, and more importantly why a fish would evolve to stand like a piece of camera equipment, we have to look past the animal itself and analyze the strict fluid dynamics of the ocean floor. The bottom of the abyssal plain is not just a static environment. It is governed by the physics of fluid motion. Across the ocean floor, deep, slow-moving currents constantly sweep across the mud. However, because of the physical friction between the moving water and the solid sediment, the water immediately adjacent to the seafloor slows down dramatically. This creates a highly stratified zone known in fluid dynamics as the benthic boundary layer. If you are a fish lying flat on the mud, the water velocity around you is practically zero. However, just 1 meter above the mud, the friction dissipates, and the water flows at a much faster, more consistent velocity. This moving water is the lifeblood of the abyss, carrying a continuous drifting supply of microscopic crustaceans, dead organic matter, and tiny copepods. The tripod fish faces a severe biomechanical dilemma. How does it reach the faster-flowing, food-rich water of the boundary layer without burning precious energy constantly swimming upward against gravity? The evolutionary solution was to build its own biological scaffolding. The tripod fish achieved this by fundamentally modifying its skeletal and fin structure to create three distinct points of contact, the most mathematically stable geometric configuration possible. These three stilts are not legs, and they contain absolutely no bones in their elongated sections. They are highly specialized modifications of the fish's natural fin rays. Two of the stilts are formed from the enormously elongated rays of its pelvic fins, positioned on the underside of its belly. The third stilt is formed from the lower lobe of its caudal fin, or its tail. These fin rays are made of an incredibly flexible, lightweight biological material. When the fish is swimming, which it does only rarely to escape a larger predator or find a new location, these long fin rays trail limply behind it like long pieces of string, offering almost zero hydrodynamic drag. But when the fish decides to land, a remarkable biomechanical transformation occurs. The exact mechanism of how the fish turns these limp, string-like rays into rigid, load-bearing stilts remains a subject of intense scientific fascination. Marine biologists believe the fish utilizes a localized form of biological hydraulics. By forcefully pumping specialized internal fluids into the microscopic hollow canals running through the core of the fin rays, the fish increases the internal hydrostatic pressure. This turns the limp filaments into incredibly rigid, turgid pillars, much like inflating a long balloon until it becomes stiff enough to stand on its own. However, standing on the abyssal plane presents a severe physical hazard. The ground down here is not solid rock or packed sand. It is composed of a material called pelagic ooze, a hyperfine semi-liquid slurry made of dissolved microscopic shells, whale dust and clay that has been raining down from the surface for millions of years. This ooze has almost zero shear strength. If a heavy concentrated object touches down, it will immediately slice through the mud and sink deep into the sediment. To prevent itself from sinking, the tripod fish utilizes the exact same physical principles as a human wearing snowshoes. The physical concept is simple. Pressure equals force divided by area. If the fish wants to reduce the pressure it exerts on the mud, it must increase the surface area of its feet. At the very tip of each of its three rigid fin rays, the fish has evolved specialized flattened, spongy pads. These biological foot pads distribute the microscopic weight of the fish over a much wider area, preventing the sharp fin rays from piercing the delicate crust of the abyssal ooze. It is also crucial to note that the tripod fish does not actually weigh very much in the water. Like many deep-sea specialists, it completely lacks a heavy, gas-filled swim bladder, which would be crushed by the pressure. Instead, its tissues are highly saturated with water and lightweight lipids, giving it a state of near-perfect neutral buoyancy. When the tripod fish deploys its landing gear, it is not actually holding up its body weight. The three fins act more like tethers or biological anchors, gently hooking the perfectly buoyant fish to the sea floor, preventing it from being blown away by the current. Once the landing is completely secure, the tripod fish initiates its masterclass in energy conservation and fluid dynamics. It physically pivots its body so that its face is pointing directly into the oncoming deep-sea current. This behavior, known as positive rheotaxis, ensures that the water is always flowing seamlessly from its head toward its tail. By maintaining this perfectly aerodynamic profile, the fish minimizes water resistance and ensures it does not get knocked over by sudden shifts in the fluid flow. Now the trap is set, but the tripod fish is entirely blind. Its eyes have degenerated into tiny, useless, opaque pearls buried under its skin. In the absolute darkness of the boundary layer, it relies entirely on a highly advanced three-dimensional tactile radar system. While its pelvic and tail fins are used for standing, its two pectoral fins, located just behind its gills, have been radically modified for sensory detection. These pectoral fins are thrust upward and forward, arching gracefully over the fish's head like the massive curved antennae of a radar dish. These elongated fin rays are densely packed with highly sensitive mechanoreceptors and spinal nerves. They do not just feel the water, they act as a biological funnel. When the deep-sea current flows past the fish, the arched pectoral fins physically alter the hydrodynamic flow of the water, creating a slight localized vortex that funnels the moving water directly toward the fish's gaping mouth. As microscopic prey items such as tiny shrimp or drifting copepods are carried blindly along the current, they inevitably crash into the invisible extended antennae of the pectoral fins. The moment the mechanoreceptors register the microscopic vibration of a struggling insect of the sea, the nerves send a lightning-fast impulse to the brain. Because the fish is already perfectly aligned with the current, and its pectoral fins have already funneled the prey toward its centerline, the tripod fish does not even need to lunge. It simply opens its jaws slightly wider, and the ocean current literally washes the food directly into its mouth. This strategy represents the absolute peak of metabolic efficiency. The tripod fish expends almost zero adenosine triphosphate for locomotion. It expends zero energy pursuing prey. It does not waste calories generating bioluminescent light, and it does not maintain a costly visual cortex. It simply stands like a silent sentinel in the dark, acting as a living, breathing filter net, allowing the physics of the ocean current to do absolutely all of the work. It can maintain this statuesque posture for days, weeks, or potentially even months at a time, entirely undisturbed in the silent void. Yet, this extreme stationary lifestyle presents one massive, seemingly insurmountable biological problem. The abyssal plain is the single largest habitat on planet Earth, covering more than half of the globe's surface. In this near-infinite three-dimensional space, population densities are staggeringly low. If you are a stationary fish that never moves from your chosen spot and you are completely blind, the statistical probability of ever encountering another tripod fish to mate with is infinitesimally small. If the species relied on standard, separate male and female sexes, they would have gone extinct almost immediately, completely unable to sustain a breeding population. To solve the mathematical nightmare of deep-sea reproduction, the tripod fish has evolved one of the most remarkable reproductive systems in the vertebrate world. It is a simultaneous hermaphrodite. Every single tripod fish standing in the darkness possesses both fully functional male reproductive organs and fully functional female reproductive organs simultaneously. They produce both sperm and eggs within their own bodies. This guarantees that if, by some incredible stroke of luck, two tripod fish happen to bump into each other in the dark, mating is absolutely guaranteed, regardless of who they just met. There is no searching for a specific gender. They simply exchange genetic material, fertilizing each other to maximize genetic diversity and part ways. But the evolutionary genius of the tripod fish goes one step further. If a tripod fish lives its entire decades-long life isolated on the mud and never encounters a single member of its own species, its genetic lineage is still not lost. As a last resort, the fish is biologically capable of self-fertilization. It can release its own eggs and internally fertilize them with its own sperm. While this cloning-like process does not provide the benefits of genetic variation, it is a brilliant, fail-safe mechanism designed to guarantee survival in a world defined by absolute isolation. The tripod fish is not just an animal, it is a profound lesson in the physics of survival. It teaches us that in environments of extreme scarcity, the winner is not the strongest, the fastest, or the most aggressive. The winner is the one that learns how to surrender to the environment. By weaponizing the fluid dynamics of the benthic boundary layer, turning its fins into landing gear and re-engineering its reproductive biology to conquer total isolation, the tripod fish has achieved total mastery over the abyss. It stands silently in the dark, completely at peace in an environment that would instantly annihilate nearly every other living thing on Earth. As we leave the vast, flat expanse of the abyssal plain and descend even further, the ocean floor suddenly drops away beneath us. We are now crossing the threshold into the ultimate depths of the planet, the Hadal zone. Beginning at around 6,000 meters and plunging down to 11,000 meters, These deep ocean trenches are the most extreme and isolated habitats on Earth. Down here, the hydrostatic pressure transitions from merely crushing to physically obliterating. At 8,000 meters below the surface, the pressure reaches a staggering 800 times standard atmospheric pressure. Human intuition, based on thousands of years of terrestrial engineering, strongly dictates that to survive an environment of unimaginable physical force, one must build impenetrable armor. When naval engineers design deep-diving submersibles, they construct spherical hulls made of titanium several inches thick to hold back the crushing weight of the water. We naturally expect biology to follow the exact same logic. We expect the deepest fish in the ocean to be a heavily armored leviathan, clad in thick, interlocking scales and supported by a massive, unbreakable skeletal frame. However, nature operates on a vastly different set of physical principles than human engineering. When marine biologists deployed baited camera landers to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the creature they discovered reigning over the 8,000-meter mark shattered every preconceived notion of deep-sea survival. It was not a terrifying, armored monster. It was a small, pale, flabby creature that looked remarkably like a translucent pink tadpole or a piece of discarded wet tissue paper. This is the Mariana snailfish, formerly classified as Pseudoliparus swirae. Currently holding the record as the deepest living fish ever discovered, the Mariana snailfish is an absolute masterclass in extreme biological adaptation. It proves that in the ultimate depths of the ocean, the secret to survival is not to fight the pressure with rigid strength, but to completely surrender to it through extreme physiological softness. To understand why the snailfish has abandoned armor, we must first analyze the severe chemical limitations of the Hadal zone. In standard vertebrate biology, skeletal strength and protective scales are constructed primarily from a mineral matrix called calcium phosphate, specifically in the form of hydroxyapatite. In the warm, sunlit surface waters, building and maintaining this hard calcium matrix is relatively easy, because the water is heavily supersaturated with calcium ions. However, the physical chemistry of the ocean changes drastically as you descend. Because deep ocean water is incredibly cold and under immense hydrostatic pressure, the chemical solubility of calcium compounds fundamentally shifts. The increased pressure actually forces the calcium and carbonate ions to separate and dissolve directly back into the seawater. This creates a highly specific chemical threshold known as the calcium compensation depth. Below this invisible boundary, the ocean water becomes highly corrosive to calcium-based minerals. If a fish were to attempt to grow thick, heavy bones or hard, interlocking scales down in the Mariana Trench, the surrounding seawater would actively dissolve those structures faster than the animal's biology could build them. The energetic cost of constantly fighting this chemical dissolution would rapidly bankrupt the fish's metabolic reserves, leading to starvation. Therefore, the Mariana snailfish has completely abandoned the concept of scales. Its skin is entirely naked, smooth, and highly translucent, revealing the internal organs and pale musculature beneath. But the loss of scales is only the outermost layer of its adaptation. The true genius of the snailfish lies deep within its anatomy, specifically in the radical deconstruction of its own skeleton. When scientists sequenced the complete genome of the Mariana snailfish and compared it to its shallow water relatives, they made a stunning discovery regarding a specific gene known as BGLAP. This gene is responsible for producing a protein called osteocalcin, which is the primary biological catalyst that binds calcium to the structural framework of bones, turning soft tissue into hard ossified skeletal material. In the Mariana snailfish, the BGLAP gene is completely broken. It contains a premature stop codon, a genetic mutation that essentially permanently disables the production of osteocalcin. In a surface-dwelling fish, or a human, this mutation would result in a catastrophic, highly lethal bone disease. But in the crushing depths of the Hadal zone, this genetic deletion is a brilliant evolutionary triumph. Because the fish cannot produce osteocalcin, its skeleton never fully ossifies into hard bone. Instead, the skeletal framework of the Mariana snailfish remains largely in a state of highly flexible, watery cartilage, supported by a matrix of complex sugars known as glycosaminoglycans. This cartilaginous skeleton provides a massive biomechanical advantage. Hard, heavily calcified bones are rigid, which means they contain microscopic structural boundaries that can be subjected to shear stress. Under 800 atmospheres of pressure, the water molecules would act like tiny wedges, forcefully infiltrating the rigid crystalline lattice of the calcium phosphate, causing the bones to become incredibly brittle and eventually microfracture. Cartilage, on the other hand, is mostly water. It is a highly compressible, flexible tissue that bends and flexes without snapping. By refusing to calcify its skeleton, the snailfish prevents its own framework from being crushed into dust. Nowhere is this principle of flexibility more critical than in the structure of the animal's skull. In terrestrial animals, the skull is a heavily fused, rigid box of bone designed to completely enclose and protect the delicate brain. However, in the deep ocean, a closed, rigid box is the most dangerous geometric shape possible. If there is even the slightest pressure differential between the inside of the box and the crushing weight of the water outside, the box will violently implode. To prevent its head from collapsing, the Mariana snailfish has evolved a highly modified open cranium. Its skull is not a solid sphere. It is highly porous and incomplete. The skull features massive fontanelles, which are large unossified gaps in the cranial roof, very similar to the soft spots found on a human newborn's head. But in the snailfish, these gaps never close. Furthermore, the skull bones that do exist are incredibly thin, disconnected, and flexible. This open architecture allows the internal fluids surrounding the brain to perfectly and instantly equalize with the extreme hydrostatic pressure of the outside ocean. There is no rigid barrier trying to hold the pressure back. The water pushes in, but the internal fluids push back out with the exact same immense force. Because liquids, such as the water inside the fish's cells and cranial cavity, are fundamentally incompressible, the structural integrity of the skull is flawlessly maintained. The brain is entirely safe not because it is locked in a vault, but because it is bathed in a fluid environment that is in absolute thermodynamic equilibrium with the trench around it. This philosophy of hydrostatic equilibrium extends to the fish's soft tissues as well. Beneath its scaleless skin, the body of the Mariana snailfish is enveloped in a thick layer of a highly viscous, gelatinous substance. This jelly-like tissue is incredibly rich in water and specialized proteins, providing the fish with perfect neutral buoyancy without the need for a gas-filled swim bladder. Any internal cavity containing air or gas would instantly collapse into a fraction of a millimeter under this pressure, severely damaging the surrounding tissues. By replacing all gas with water and replacing hard bone with flexible jelly-like cartilage, the fish becomes practically immune to the physical effects of hydrostatic pressure. You cannot crush a water balloon if it is submerged deeply in the ocean, because the pressure inside and outside the balloon is exactly the same. Despite its flabby, pathetic appearance to human eyes, the Mariana snailfish is the undisputed apex predator of its domain. In the pitch-black depths of the trench, there are very few large predators. The ecosystem here is heavily dominated by swarms of deep-sea amphipods, tiny shrimp-like crustaceans that scavenge on the marine snow drifting down from above. The snailfish cruises silently over the trench floor, using sensitive pores on its face to detect the chemical signatures and microscopic vibrations of these amphipods. When it locates a swarm, it uses its surprisingly powerful suction-based jaws to rapidly vacuum the crustaceans into its stomach. The Mariana snailfish represents a profound inversion of evolutionary logic. It proves that surviving the most violent, crushing physical forces on the planet does not require building an impenetrable fortress. Rigidity is a fatal flaw in the abyss. True resilience comes from letting go of the heavy, expensive biological armor of the surface world. By genetically deactivating its calcium networks, maintaining a soft cartilaginous skeleton and leaving its skull permanently open to the crushing depths. The snailfish has achieved absolute harmony with the Hadal zone. It is a ghost of a fish, a creature so perfectly adapted to extreme pressure that if you were to ever bring it to the surface, the sudden lack of pressure would cause its gelatinous body to literally melt and lose all structural cohesion. It belongs entirely to the abyss, a masterpiece of yielding to the very forces that would destroy anything else. Having examined the apex predators of the abyss, a fundamental glaring question remains regarding the Hadal zone ecosystem. We have established that the deep ocean is entirely devoid of sunlight. Without photons of light, the process of photosynthesis is physically impossible. In the terrestrial world and the sunlit surface ocean, photosynthesis is the absolute foundational engine of life. Plants and phytoplankton use solar energy to convert inorganic carbon dioxide into organic, energy-rich sugars. Every other creature on Earth, from the smallest insect to the largest apex predator, ultimately derives its biological energy from this solar-powered foundation. But at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 11,000 meters away from the sun, this foundational base is completely missing. By all conventional rules of biology, the Hadal zone should be a sterile dead void. Yet, as the existence of the Mariana snailfish and swarming amphipods proves, it is not. If the food chain does not begin with the sun, where does the energy come from? The answer is a morbid but highly efficient biological supply chain. The deep ocean runs entirely on a continuous slow-motion rain of death, falling from the world above. This primary source of biological energy is known to oceanographers as marine snow. If you were to turn on the floodlights of a deep-diving submersible in the mid-water column, the water would not appear clear. It would be filled with millions of tiny, pale, drifting particles, looking exactly like a heavy terrestrial blizzard suspended in anti-gravity. This is marine snow, and it is the lifeblood of the deep ocean. But these flakes are not frozen water. They are composed of biological detritus, the microscopic corpses of dead phytoplankton, the molted exoskeletons of microscopic crustaceans, clumps of sticky biological mucus secreted by zooplankton, and millions of tiny fecal pellets raining down from the massive schools of fish near the surface. As these microscopic fragments of organic waste begin to sink, they collide and stick together, bound by sticky extracellular polymeric substances, which are essentially biological glue secreted by bacteria. As the flakes fall, they grow larger, sometimes reaching several centimeters in diameter. However, the journey from the sunlit surface to the bottom of the Mariana Trench is agonizingly slow. Depending on the size and density of the flake, it can fall at a rate of only a few dozen meters per day. It can take weeks or even months for a single particle of marine snow to finally touch down on the abyssal mud. During this long descent, the marine snow is subjected to intense biological degradation. The water column is filled with pelagic bacteria and midwater scavengers that intercept this falling food. They strip away the most easily digestible high-energy nutrients, the simple sugars and rich proteins. By the time the marine snow finally reaches the Hadal zone, it is highly refractory. This means it has been stripped of its premium nutrients and reduced to tough, difficult to digest biological structural materials such as chitin from crab shells and complex woody cellulose from sunken plant matter. To extract the remaining stubborn calories from this degraded snow, the scavengers of the Mariana Trench possess highly specialized digestive biochemistry. The most successful and abundant of these scavengers are the Hadal amphipods, particularly a species known as Hirundellea gigas. These tiny, pale, shrimp-like crustaceans swarm the trench floor in the millions. When biologists examined the digestive tracts of these amphipods, they discovered something astonishing. Hirundellea gigas possesses specialized digestive enzymes, including a highly potent cellulase, which allows it to chemically break down and digest solid wood and tough plant matter that occasionally sinks into the trench. Furthermore, to survive the extreme pressure, These amphipods extract aluminum ions from the ocean mud and combine them with simple sugars to form an aluminum-based biological gel that coats their internal organs, acting as a chemical pressure shield. These highly adapted scavengers consume the degraded marine snow, converting the waste of the surface world into fresh Hadal biomass. The amphipods are then consumed by the snailfish, pushing the recycled energy up the trench's unique food chain. But while marine snow provides a constant, ultra-low-calorie baseline of energy, the deep-sea ecosystem is occasionally blessed with an astronomical, localized jackpot of biological wealth. This phenomenon is known as a whale fall. When a massive marine mammal, such as a 40-ton sperm whale or a grey whale, dies of old age or disease, its body does not always float. If it exhales before dying, its massive carcass will sink rapidly through the water column, bypassing the midwater scavengers entirely and crash violently into the deep ocean floor. The impact of a 40-ton whale carcass on the abyssal plain is the biological equivalent of a massive lottery win for the deep-sea ecosystem. To put the energy scale into perspective, the amount of organic carbon contained in a single adult whale carcass is roughly equivalent to 2,000 years of standard marine snow falling over that exact same square patch of mud. It is an incomprehensible oasis of flesh, fat and bone appearing suddenly in a starving desert. The arrival of a whale fall triggers a highly predictable, mathematically sequential ecological succession that can last for up to a century. The first phase is the mobile scavenger stage. The scent of decaying flesh, carried by the deep ocean currents, acts as a dinner bell for miles around. Within hours, the carcass is swarmed by thousands of highly mobile, aggressive scavengers. Deep-sea sleeper sharks, bizarre chimera fish, and endless swarms of amphipods descend upon the whale. The most prolific early arrivals are the hagfish. These ancient, jawless fish possess raspy, tooth-covered tongues. Because they lack jaws to bite off chunks of meat, a hagfish will latch onto the whale carcass and literally tie its own long, eel-like body into a knot. It then slides the knot down its body to press against the whale, using the mechanical leverage to violently rip away pieces of flesh. During this chaotic first stage, which can last from several months to 2 years, these scavengers will aggressively strip the carcass of its soft tissue, consuming up to 50 kilograms of meat per day until nothing is left but a massive, gleaming white skeleton. Once the soft meat is gone, the sharks and hagfish depart, triggering the second phase, the enrichment opportunist stage. The mud surrounding the whale skeleton has been heavily saturated with blood, microscopic scraps of flesh, and organic oils. This enriched sediment becomes a breeding ground for massive colonies of polychaete worms, deep-sea snails, and specialized crustaceans. These organisms do not feed on the bones. They feed on the organically enriched mud surrounding the carcass. They rapidly multiply, colonizing the immediate area and creating a dense, localized carpet of life that can persist for up to 2 years. However, the true biological marvel of the whale fall occurs in the third and longest phase, the sulfophilic stage. By this point, the skeleton has been picked completely clean of meat. But whale bones are not dry, hollow structures. The massive skeletal frame of a whale contains up to 60% of its weight in highly concentrated, energy-rich bone lipids and heavy biological oils. For most animals, this massive reservoir of fat is locked away inside an impenetrable fortress of solid calcium matrix. Enter the Osedax worm, colloquially known as the zombie worm. When scientists first discovered the Osedax growing like a red fuzzy carpet over sunken whale bones, they were completely baffled by its anatomy. The zombie worm has no eyes, no stomach, no mouth, and absolutely no digestive tract. How does an animal eat a solid whalebone without a mouth? The Osedax relies on a terrifying combination of chemical warfare and microbial symbiosis. The worm attaches to the surface of the bone and extends a complex network of fleshy green biological roots deep into the microscopic pores of the skeleton. These roots act like a biological drill. The worm uses specialized proton pumps in its cells to secrete highly concentrated acid directly onto the bone, dissolving the hard calcium phosphate matrix. Once the hard bone is melted away, the roots absorb the trapped collagen and heavy lipids. But because the worm has no stomach, it cannot digest these fats. Instead, its root system is packed with billions of specialized symbiotic bacteria. These bacteria consume the raw whale fat and metabolize it, breaking it down and leaking perfectly processed nutrients directly into the worm's bloodstream. As these deep tissue bacteria and other free-living microbes break down the massive lipid reserves inside the bones, they rapidly consume all the available oxygen in the immediate area. The interior of the bone becomes an entirely anaerobic or oxygen-free environment. This triggers a radical shift in the deep-sea chemistry. A new wave of specialized anaerobic bacteria takes over. Because they cannot use oxygen to metabolize the fat, they use sulfate molecules, which are naturally abundant in seawater. As these anaerobic bacteria process the sulfate and the whale fat, they excrete a highly toxic, pungent chemical byproduct, hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is the exact same chemical that gives rotten eggs their terrible smell, and it is highly toxic to most standard animal life. But in the deep ocean, hydrogen sulfide is the ultimate chemical fuel. The entire whale skeleton begins to slowly leak a steady stream of hydrogen sulfide out into the water. This chemical emission attracts massive colonies of chemosynthetic bacteria. These microbes possess the miraculous biological ability to use the chemical energy locked inside hydrogen sulfide to fix carbon dioxide and create organic sugars, entirely replacing the need for sunlight. The whale skeleton essentially transforms into a biological cold seep hydrothermal vent. It becomes a localized, self-sustaining chemical reactor. For up to 50 or even 100 years, the slow, steady decay of the bone lipids produces enough hydrogen sulfide to power a massive localized chemosynthetic food web. Mats of yellow and white bacteria cover the bones, which in turn feed deep-sea mussels, specialized clams, and blind crabs. The Hadal Zone ecosystem is the ultimate display of biological pragmatism. It wastes nothing. It takes the drifting, microscopic detritus of the surface and the fallen titans of the mammal world, and through a masterpiece of specialized digestive enzymes, flesh-eating roots, and sulfur-breathing bacteria, it builds a thriving alien kingdom in the darkest abyss on Earth. As we stand in the absolute darkness of the Hadal Zone, surrounded by chemosynthetic bacteria, blind scavengers, and pressure-proof fish, we must recognize that the implications of this ecosystem extend far beyond the boundaries of marine biology. We have reached the bottom of our world, but in doing so, we have opened a window to the cosmos. The bizarre, sunless survival strategies we have just witnessed are the cornerstone of an entirely different scientific discipline, astrobiology. The Mariana Trench is not just a geographical extreme, it is a biological blueprint for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. For the majority of modern scientific history, our search for life in the universe was governed by a very strict, heliocentric rule known as the Goldilocks zone, or the circumstellar habitable zone. Astronomers believed that in order for a planet to support life, it had to orbit its host star at the exact right distance. It could not be too close, or the water would boil away, and it could not be too far, or the water would freeze solid. The entire paradigm was built on the assumption that photosynthesis, driven by photons of starlight, was the mandatory engine for a biosphere. The deep ocean trenches completely shattered that assumption. By proving that life can thrive on chemosynthesis, utilizing the chemical energy locked inside hydrogen sulfide, methane, and decaying organic matter, the abyss redefined the absolute limits of biology. It taught us a profound lesson. Life does not need a sun. It only requires a liquid solvent, a source of carbon, and a chemical energy gradient. With this revolutionary biological perspective, our gaze shifts outward, away from the sun, to the freezing outer realms of our own solar system. we look toward the gas giants, Jupiter and Saturn, and specifically at their icy moons, Europa and Enceladus. On the surface, these moons appear to be dead, frozen wastelands, locked in a permanent deep freeze hundreds of degrees below zero. They sit far outside the traditional Goldilocks zone. However, astrophysicists have discovered that beneath miles of solid ice, these moons harbour massive global oceans of liquid water. These oceans are kept from freezing not by sunlight, but by extreme gravitational friction, a process known as tidal heating, generated by the immense gravitational pull of their host planets. The environmental parallels between the bottoms of these alien oceans and the Mariana Trench are staggering. When NASA's Cassini spacecraft flew through the massive geysers erupting from the south pole of Enceladus, its mass spectrometers detected something truly extraordinary. The plumes were not just water. They contained molecular hydrogen, ammonia, carbon dioxide, heavy organic molecules, and critically methane. This is the exact same chemical cocktail that bubbles up from the cold seeps and hydrothermal fissures of Earth's deep ocean trenches. The fundamental chemistry required to support a sunless biosphere is already there, swirling in the dark alien currents. If biological evolution on Earth was able to engineer molecules like trimethylamine N oxide to protect proteins from shattering under 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, and if it could program bacteria to build a thriving ecosystem entirely out of the toxic sulfur leaking from sunken bones, there is no biological law that says the exact same chemical evolution cannot occur under the ice of Europa. The extremophiles of the Hadal zone, the blind tripod fish, the giant squids, and the symbiotic bacteria, are the closest things to aliens we have ever encountered. They prove that biological life is incredibly stubborn, relentlessly opportunistic, and mathematically inevitable wherever the right chemistry exists. When space agencies design their next-generation interplanetary probes, such as the Europa Clipper, they are not looking for little green men in flying saucers. They are looking for the biological signatures of the Mariana Trench. They are designing instruments calibrated to detect the microscopic chemosynthetic bacteria that might be clinging to the hydrothermal vents at the bottom of an alien sea. The deep ocean has taught us that the universe is likely teeming with life, but it is a dark, cold, and chemically extreme form of life. To find our cosmic neighbours, we do not need to look up at the bright sunlit planets. We need to look down into the crushing pitch-black abyss. The Mariana Trench is Earth's final frontier, but it is simultaneously the absolute starting line for our journey into the biological unknown of the cosmos. As we leave the crushing depths of the Hadal zone and begin our long ascent back to the sunlit world, we are forced to leave our surface-level prejudices behind. To the human eye, the Mariana Trench is a nightmare realm filled with monsters. We see creatures with no faces, predators that melt into their mates, giant eyes staring into the void, and fish that look like discarded jelly. But this is purely human arrogance. What we perceive as terrifying anomalies are, in biological reality, the absolute pinnacle of evolutionary perfection. In an environment defined by extreme hydrostatic pressure, freezing temperatures, and eternal darkness, being normal is a sudden death sentence. To survive the Mariana Trench, life had to completely rewrite its own molecular rulebook. It had to trade rigid armor for yielding flexibility, abandon the luxury of sight for the brutal efficiency of touch, and harness the toxic chemistry of the abyss to replace the sun. Yet, as profound as these discoveries are, they represent only a microscopic fraction of the mysteries hidden beneath the waves. It is a staggering, humbling fact that even today, in the era of advanced space exploration, more than 80% of our own global ocean remains completely unmapped, unobserved, and unexplored by human eyes. We possess far better, higher resolution maps of the surface of Mars and the Moon than we do of our own seafloor. The Mariana Trench is not the end of the deep sea mystery. It is merely the deepest frontier we have managed to touch. If you found this journey into the dark as fascinating as we did, Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more scientific deep dives. Let us know in the comments below which deep-sea survival strategy shocked you the most. Until next time, remember that our planet is vastly more alien and vastly more beautiful than we could ever imagine. Keep exploring.